Ba- Welcome to another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard. And today we shall continue our series on reading about anarchy. Peter Guedelou's Anarchy Works. We're on chapter 5, talking about what about gangs and bullies? Actually, I keep doing this. I forgot to update my title. Let me do that real quick. And but last time we left off on the latter half of the first section of chapter 5, talking about um, who will protect us without police, right? And Peter, he was throwing shots, which I love so much. Talking about a lot of really fantastic points, such as the fact that in a lot of places that do without the police, that either make them leave or um, just figure out a way to build a community without them, they're actually safer than with the police, right? And a large part of that is because the police force is often a kind of monopolization of force, right? And because of that, they often care more about you your relationship with the authority, right? Rather than the relationship between peers and things like that. Furthermore, when people have a monopoly on something, especially power, right, on force, on violence, then they tend to abuse that power more often than not. And you see that pretty much everywhere. They pointed out a freaking prison, right? Where the inmates were safer, were more, more cooperative, were just better people and had a better experience without the cops, without the guards in the prison. Just think about that for a second, right? Um, so I think it's really good to have these real life examples showing this is not just theory, right? This is real life examples, showing you that this is possible. This is what reality looks like. So yeah, it was really great to dive into all that. But here we go. Change my title. Um, so let's continue. Says, what about gangs and bullies? Some fear that in a society without authorities, the strongest people would run amok, taking and doing whatever they wanted. I hate this idea, right? As soon as you hear, oh yeah, anarchy, they like chaos is violence. Oh, you go let the people, do what you want. And I'm like, but let's get into it because I know he's going to talk about it. Never mind that this describes what generally goes on in societies with government, right? This fear derives from the status myth that we are all isolated. The government would very much like you to believe that without its protection, you are vulnerable to the whims of anyone stronger than you. However, no bully is stronger than an entire community. A person who shatters the social peace, disrespects another person's needs, and acts in an authoritarian, bullying way can be defeated or kicked out by neighbors working together to restore the peace. And this is a huge thing, right? This goes into urban planning, because a huge problem with how a lot of the countries like America is like car dependent cities and areas is that they destroy the very idea of community, right? I'm living in a neighborhood. It's a nice neighborhood, and we actually are cool with our neighbors, like directly across from us. But I don't really know any of the other neighbors, right? And it's really hard to get to know, the other neighbors because the only time you really see them is when they're out. They get in a car and just go off because you don't really see them unless they choose to walk, right? Um, like I would have to go door to door and like, hey, I'm your neighbor. Can we talk? And it's just weird, right? I'm a super introverted person. None of them are doing it either. It's just it the culture's not there, right? The community is not there. And it's the design of car dependent suburbia and many other, kind of communities in America and these types of places are um against or kind of destroy the ability to create a intimate community. So I understand why people, automatically assume that we're going to be isolated and that you have to fend for yourself or whatever, right? Because we don't currently live in a world where most people even know what a community feels like, right? most thing people know about a community is like a Facebook group or a freaking Discord group. And don't get me wrong, those can be all right, but it's not the same as living in a space where you actually intimately trust every single person in your space, in your community, in your neighborhood, right? Where everybody feels like family. Most of us don't live like that, right? So this is why I think one of the biggest things we need to do if we really want to make a difference is to build communities, build and design, our spaces such that it is easy to build and live in the community. But let's continue. In Christiana, I hope I'm saying that right. The anti-authoritarian autonomous quarter in Denmark's capital, they have been dealing with their own problems and the problems associated with all the visitors they receive and the resulting high social mobility. Many people come as tourists, and many more come to buy hash. There are no laws in Christianity, and soft drugs are easy to come by, though hard drugs have been successfully banned. Within Christiania, there are numerous workshops that produce a variety of goods, and most famously, their high quality bicycles. There are also restaurants, cafes, a kindergarten, a clinic, a health food shop, a bookshop, an anarchist space, and a concert venue. Awesome. A Christianity never has been successfully dominated by gangs or resident bullies. In 1984, a motorcycle gang moved in, hoping to exploit the lawlessness of the autonomous zone and monopolize the hash trade. After several conflicts, the residents of Christiania succeeded in kicking out the bikers using mostly peaceful tactics. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I gotta look this place up. The worst bullying has come from the police, of course, who recently resumed entering Christianity to arrest people for marijuana and hash, generally as a pretext to escalate tensions. Local real estate developers would love to see the Free State destroyed because it sits on land that has become very valuable. Decades ago, the residents of Christianity had a heated debate about how to deal with the problem of hard drugs coming in from outside. Over much opposition, they decided to ask the police for help, only to find that the police concentrated on locking people up for soft drugs and protected the spread of hard drugs like heroin. I wonder why. Presumably in the hope that an addiction epidemic would destroy the autonomous social experiment. Yep, same thing they did in America. It is by no means the first time police or other agents of the state have spread addictive drugs while suppressing soft or hallucinogenic drugs. In fact, this seems universally to be a part of the police strategies for repression. Yeah. In the end, the residents of Christiana kicked out the police and dealt with the hard drug problem themselves by kicking out dealers and using social pressure to discourage hard drug use. Beautiful. Beautiful. In Christiania, as elsewhere, the state presents the greatest danger to the community. Unlike the individual bullies one imagines terrorizing a lawless society, the state cannot be easily defeated. Typically, the state seeks a monopoly on force, on the pretext of protecting citizens from other bullies. This is the justification for prohibiting anyone outside the state apparatus from using force, especially in self-defense against the government. In return for relinquishing this power, citizens are directed to the court system as a means of defending their interests. But of course, the court system is a part of the state and protects its interests above all others. When the government comes to seize your land to build a shopping mall, for example, you can take the matter to court or even bring it before the city council, but you might find yourself talking to someone who stands to profit from the shopping mall. The bullies' courts will not be fair to the bullies' victims, and they will not sympathize with you if you defend yourself against the eviction. Instead, they will lock you up. He's speaking here, man. Goodness. In the context, those who want resolution often have to seek it outside the courts. A military dictatorship seized power in Argentina in 1976 and waged a dirty war against leftists, torturing and killing 30,000 people. Oof. The officers responsible for the torture and executions were pardoned by the democratic government that succeeded the dictatorship. The mothers of the Plaza de Mayo who began gathering to demand an end to the disappearances and to know what happened to their children were an important social force in ending the reign of terror. As the government has never taken serious steps to hold the murderers and torturers accountable, people have elaborated a popular justice that builds on and goes beyond the protests and memorials organized by the mothers. When a participant in the dirty war is located, activists put up posters throughout the neighborhood informing everyone of his presence. Ooh. they mass they may ask local shops to refuse the person entry and follow and harass them. Oh, excuse me. And a tactic known as escrache. Escrache? Escrache? Hundreds or even thousands of participants will march to the house of a dirty war participant with signs, banners, puppets, and drums. They sing, chant, and make music for hours, shaming the torture and letting everyone know what he has done. The crowd may attack his house with paint bombs. Despite a justice system that protects the powerful, the social movements of Argentina have organized collectively to shame and isolate the very worst bullies. Beautiful. It's really crazy how much we kind of ignore the power of shame, right? The power of social pressure. Like we talk about it in terms, oh yeah, it's peer pressure and this, that, and that, but it's a huge part of human nature, right? If you want to talk about human nature, that like social pressure, social, norms is one of the biggest, kind of uh constraints, aspects, whatever you want to call it, to human behavior, right? If you want to understand why a certain community does or doesn't do something, look at their social connections, look at their social behaviors, and that will tell you a lot. So, yeah, that's beautiful stuff there. Um, I'm gonna go ahead and continue because we're only at 10 minutes, and yeah, this next one is short too. So we're gonna read the next one. It says, "What's to stop someone from killing people?" And this is gonna be interesting because again, this is one of the main things people say. Oh, if it's anarchist, then people are just gonna kill people left and right? Which is dumb because again, humans are human. Most people don't want to kill people, right? What people don't even realize is that something I learned recently is that, and you can look up the data for this. Um, when it comes to armies and like militaries and things like that, even in the military, right? Up until the mid 1970s or 80s or 50s, I don't know, up until relatively recently, throughout most of human history, only 10 to maybe 20% of people in an army would actually kill people. Think about that. In an army, only 10 to 20% of the people would actually be able to come, like, take their gun or take their weapon and kill another human being. That should show you a lot, tell you a lot about, you know, um, human nature, right? And our propensity against violence, particularly, killing people, particularly, yeah, murder. Like it's serious. Like the only reason why our military has begun so, dangerous is because they've basically turned these people into machines. Where in the last I think it may have been during the World War II in the last era, but basically they realized this, and so they came up with training regimes that teaches people to not think and just shoot, right? Shoot at a human target, and furthermore, they use social cohesion to make you feel like your military people are your brothers, right? They're your people in arms, and you want to do everything you can to protect them. So it's like double. It's not even about killing people. It's number one, these people are like, I care about them so much, I would do anything for them. And number two, you know, making it automatic. So you don't like that's what they do. Tons of training regimes or training exercises, regimes, whatever. You get it, right? They do all this training to kind of automate this process, turn it into a habit, so you no longer think, so your conscious mind does not come into the equation, right? This is why a lot of the PTSD is so problematic these days from people coming from the army because they have instilled this, killer mentality, and it's not even a kill. It's really just a sociopathy. It's a, just shoot first, questions later, like it's that type of thing. And this is really it's one of the things that makes the military so concerning in the modern century, in modern day time. But in most of human history, the vast majority of armies didn't kill people, like the vast majority of people in the army, and multiple generals and things like that throughout history have commented on this, and like most people don't even shoot their gun, and those that do may like shoot up or shoot any direction except what's going to harm the other person. So it's that's something to really think about, to realize. But anyways, much violent crime can be traced back to cultural factors. Violent crimes such as murder would probably be decreased dramatically in an anarchist society because most of its causes, poverty, televised glorification of violence. I don't think that's a cause there. There's been thoroughly debunked. Prisons and police, warfare, sexism, and the normalization of individualistic and antisocial behaviors. This is a huge part. Would disappear or decrease. The differences between Zapotec communities illustrates that peace is a choice. That the Zapotec are a sedentary agrarian indigenous nation living on land that is now claimed by the state of Mexico. One Zapotec community, La Paz, has a yearly homicide rate of 3.4 out of 100,000. A neighboring Zapotec community has a much higher homicide rate of 18 out of 100,000. What social attributes go along with the more peaceful way of life? Unlike their more violent neighbors, the La Paz Zapotec do not beat children. Accordingly, children see less violence and use less violence in their play. Mm. Similarly, wife beating is rare and not considered acceptable. Women are considered equal to men and enjoy an autonomous economic activity that is important to the life of the community, so they are not dependent on men. Beautiful. Regarding child rearing, the implications of this particular comparison are corroborated by at least one cross cultural study on socialization, which found that warm, affectionate socialization techniques correlate with low levels of conflict in society. This is why this is a huge, um, point in a thing of not hitting your kids, right? And this is big, in and my own culture with Haitian folks and really a lot of black households, and a lot of that comes not from being black or whatever, from African mythologies. It actually does not come from African culture. It comes from colonial culture, right, from slave times, right. And we can again, there is data for this. Many of the indigenous cultures throughout Africa and most of the world, right, um, did not beat their kids, right? And almost every egalitarian culture in Africa and the Native Americas, and even in China and Europe, the egalitarian cultures did not beat their kids, right? They treated their kids with respect. They treated them as peers almost, and things like that. And most of their childhood, right, was like a game. You're enjoying life and playing with your peers and things like that. And when they made the mistake, they would talk about it, right. And a big thing about mistakes and things like that is that when you do something bad, right, again, you have to think about what is bad. Why are they doing this thing? What is the bad behavior? Is it just them talking a lot? Are they um being a bully? What are they actually doing, right? And once you figure out what that is, then you go into like the behavior, and you have like natural consequences. Things like if you try to bully a peer, right, the other kids are going to shame you, right? They're not going to be your friend anymore, and so that type of behavior is not encouraged. It's not incentivized. It's not rewarded. But in our culture, right, as long as you get away with it, right? You could bully. This is why bullying is so prevalent, because you can get away with it. You just appeal to authority, or you just have a gang around you, or this, that, and the other, right? You can get away with it, because our culture kind of has this mentality of basically might makes right, which is completely counter to the idea that authority or government or order, right, creates or makes us go away from that might makes right mentality. It's not an anarchist idea that might makes right. It's only a authoritarian idea. So yeah, there's a lot of aspects of this, but oh yeah, what I was saying about the black culture, like that has come from the slave times, right? When the Europeans enslaved the Africans, you whip them and things like that. And so the not only did a lot of the black folks pick up that behavior, but they actually would try to beat their kids so that they can like scare them from doing bad things in front of the white man, right? So because if the white man caught the black kid, doing something bad, they would take the kid, they would cut off they would do like really terrible stuff to the children. And so it was out of fear, right? This is you still see this today. I'm doing this for your own good, right? So you don't have the cops around you, or this, that, and the other. You still have that justification to this day. it's like a genetic memory almost, right? But it's not good, right? It just it creates more of this, violence as an answer type of thing, right? And again, I don't mean to say like violence is never the answer. That is is actually not as peaceful or as sensical as you would think. It's not really a logical argument. Sometimes violence is the answer, right? And the fact that we can't say that is really ridiculous because our government uses violence all the time, right? So really, in our current society, what we mean to say is only people in power can use violence, which is terrible, right? It's if you think about it for 2 seconds, it's a terrible thing to say, but that's how we function in our society. But anyways, yeah, I really like that he pointed this out here. Whew. The Semai and the Norwegians were both previously mentioned as societies with low homicide rates. Until colonialism, the Sinai were stateless, whereas Norway is ruled by a government. So socialization is relatively peaceful among the Semai and the Norwegians alike. The Semai use a gift economy so wealth is evenly distributed, while Norway has one of the lowest wealth gaps of any capitalist country on account of its socialistic domestic policies. A further similarity is a reliance on medication rather than punishment. Police or prisons to solve disputes. Norway does have a police and a prison system, but compared with most states, there is a high reliance on conflict mediation mechanisms, not unlike those that flourish in peaceful stateless societies. And this is a good point too, right? It's not an all or nothing thing. Like, yes, it would be great if there were no states anywhere and all this other stuff, but there's clearly better ways to do capitalism, clearly better ways to do states. Clearly, there's better ways, right? And it's you don't have to go straight all the way to anarchism. Anarchism itself is like an action. It's a goal, right? You're always going towards it. So, we can make a better society without going full anarchy yet. And because mostly because it would just take time to get there, right? And we understand that. Like most people who understand anarchy understands that it's a multi-generational struggle. But this is a good reminder that we can also just be better at what we currently do, right? So yeah, most civil disputes in Norway must be brought before mediators before they can be taken to court, and thousands of criminal cases are taken to mediators as well. In 2001, agreement was reached in 89% of the mediations. Wow. So, in an anarchist society, violent crime would be less common. But when it did occur, would society be more vulnerable? After all, one might argue, even when violence is no longer a rational social response, psychopathic killers might still occasionally appear. Indeed. Let it suffice to say that any society capable of overthrowing a government will hardly be at the mercy of alone psychopathic killers. Exactly. All right, that's a good point, too. And societies that do not come about from a revolution, but enjoy a strong sense of community and solidarity, are capable of protecting themselves as well. Once again, community. The Inuit hunter gatherers indigenous to the Arctic regions of North America provided an example of what a stateless society can do in the worst case scenario. According to their traditions, if a person committed a murder, the community would forgive him and make him reconcile with the family of the victim. If that person commits another murder, he would be killed, usually by members of his own family group. So there would be no bad blood or cause for feud. The state's punitive methods for dealing with crime makes things worse, not better. Yep. The restorative methods for responding to social harm that are used in many stateless societies open new possibilities for escaping the cycles of abuse, punishment, and harm that are all too familiar to many of us. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. And just real quick, another like quick tangent here. I know a lot of people will be like, "Oh, you know, um, if these stateless societies are so good at protecting themselves, and how did they get destroyed by colonialists and things like that?" What people don't realize is that this is a good point, but not really, because again, what people don't realize is that these indigenous places, or these places that were stateless and everything like that, it took a long time. It took decades, if not hundreds of years, for the colonialists to actually overpower them. Right, like the Native Americans, it took from what, what's the whole thing? 1492, Columbus showed or 1692. I think it's 1492. So 1400s to like 16 1700s. when America was established, and even then they didn't have all the territory, so it was really until like the 1800s or so. Like it's a long time. That's a couple hundred years to try and conquer these people, right? And that's the same for much of Africa. It took hundreds of years from the 1400s all the way to like the 1900s for different places in Africa to be conquered and things like that. Um, and that shows you, number one, that it's not an easy thing. It wasn't like a a clear thing. But number two, and I think somewhat more importantly, is that many of these people who were conquered, who were colonized, did not actually realize what was to come. Right? It's not like they responded immediately and were, oh, these are bad people, we're going to kill them. No, a lot of them like brought them in. Like they were just cool. Like, okay, here's some new people. Let's talk. Let's see what we can learn from these people. Right? Let's do a trade thing. Like it's so frustrating to see how people just don't understand history. Many of these places in the Americas and Africa and many other places already have trade networks. Like many empires in Africa and stateless societies were trading throughout much of Africa and outside of Africa. They were trading with India, China, even, right? Some people even think that they may have traded with Americas somehow. Like I'm not sure about that, but there's a little bit of evidence that points in that direction. But either way, they had vast trade networks, so it was normal for them to see somebody new and just trade with them. It's like, okay, what can we do? And so that was the idea for a lot of these people, right? They weren't worried about being colonized, because that idea, most of them didn't do colonization. Some of them did, don't get me wrong, but most of them was like, they could protect themselves, and they cared more about trade. And so um many of the colonization kind of methods and or the kind of timeline was really a matter of internal infighting, basically, right? So for instance, in Africa, one of the big kingdoms there is the Benin, and the Mali kingdom. Like they were in that same area of around the Ivory Coast. So Benin and Mali, some of the biggest kingdoms in that area. They have, like, you may have heard of Timbuktu, is actually one of the biggest scholar cities in the world, in which many people came there to learn and things like that. um the let me get into the see you face to face here as I'm talking. So so a lot of these people, right, they had huge vast empires, but they were empires. They were already, sort of state based, right? And so when they came, there was a schism, right? And the goals here. Some of them were like, oh, we can work with these people, we can take their guns, for instance. Like that was one of the things they would trade. And the other people was like, no, we don't want those guns, like we don't want that. And so they would be infighting as the Europeans were coming in. And then as people started, slave trading and stuff like that, again, which is, there was some nuance there, because slave trading in Africa was different than slave trading in America, due to representation and having a constitution around what you can do with your slaves and things like that. But nonetheless, they embark in these things, and this is what caused that problem. But in terms of stateless societies, again, many of these stateless societies persisted even to this day, right? Many of the stateless societies are still there, but they were never, focused on, trying to conquer themselves. And so, you know it's not really a clear distinction. It's not really a clear idea that, state authoritarian, societies are so much better, or even more, like better at, like, taking things and conquering, or fighting them off. Like, it's not clear. Because again, these stateless societies still exist. Many of them fought back for, a long time and won in many places. Like, you just don't hear about them as much, right? Because this is the biggest thing, is like, it's about propaganda, right? Many of us don't even realize that, for instance, there's like the hill people of Korea, who are still fighting off the the colonies, or the states over there, right? Like, they just live in the hills, and every time, they try to come in, they fight them off, right? The Kalahari people are still in the desert, but they are staying there because they live in an area where, industry has, like, for most of human history at least, you couldn't farm there. Now, the diamond industry is realizing there's diamonds there, so they're trying to go in. um But the Kalahari people are super, flexible and adaptive. They've been in that area for a long time. Then you have, the Blackfoot Indians. They're still here. A lot of these various Native American folks. They're yeah, don't get me wrong, they're struggling, especially nowadays. But it wasn't like an easy thing. It took hundreds of years to get to this point. Um, and there's probably more stuff that I'm missing here, right? Um, but yeah, even if you do want to say that, like authoritarian regimes are so much stronger, right? Because they can essentially bully and take what they want. You have to realize that what that sounds like. You're basically saying that the virus is good, right? If you get infected with COVID, for instance, right, and it wrecks your shit, like you're not gonna be like, oh yes, this virus deserves the body, right? Let it take me, let it kill me. Like no, like this, you're gonna be like, no, we don't want this here. It's very destructive. Yes, it's infecting the entire world, but we're not on the team of the virus, right? We don't want the virus to win because then we're all gonna die. Like it's, and even if we don't die immediately, we're going to be miserable, right? It can cause a lot of really bad side effects. And that's what capitalism does, right? That's what hierarchy does. That's what authoritarian does. It infects you. And it makes it seem like, and it's, or rather to say that, that's a good thing, that it's so, I don't know, like strong or whatever. It's just ridiculous. Like cancer is extremely strong, and it can spread fast and grow fast. We're not on team cancer, right? And if you are, you're misanthropic and you're a hater. And you you want, you're got to worry about you because you're probably psychopath. Like I'm just being honest. Like most of us don't want the bad guys to win, and in this case, imperialism is the bad guy, right? Authoritarian is the bad guy, like colonization is the bad guy. So yeah, all that to say, like we really have to root for ourselves here. We really want to live in a better world. We have to realize what this stuff is doing to us on the psychological level, social level, environmental level, and so spiritual level. Everything. And if we don't, make a change, if we don't realize this problem, then it's gonna be terrible for us. It's it for us. And we haven't been here long on this earth, right? So I think we can do a lot of good and on this earth and in the solar system, in the universe, but we got to get through this. All right, we have to in, inoculate ourselves from these viruses and from this sickness, and get better. So I hope we can do that. Let me know what you think. As always, always interested to talk about these things. My headphones kind of broke, so that's why it's sideways there. But yeah, thanks for watching. As always, thanks for listening and have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.